In the heart of the Wild West, a lonely rancher finds something no one expects, a giant Apache girl, collapsing in the desert, desperate for water. One act of kindness could cost him everything. The very next day, 300 warriors surround his ranch, believing he has done her harm. But what they find instead is a story of compassion, survival, and an ancient power that could shake the earth itself. This is a battle of bullets, giants, and the desert's fury, where mercy and courage decide who lives and who dies. Visuals: quick flashes, bullets flying, a massive stone hand blocking a gun, dust storms, Naya whispering to the giant, and the iron serpent machine looming in the distance. One rancher, one girl, one desert that remembers, and a legend that won't be forgotten. The sun burned the horizon like a smoldering brand as Owen Calder rode the fence line of his forgotten ranch. Dust rose in ghostly curls behind his horse, rolling across the cracked earth like funeral smoke. Dry Creek Ranch barely deserved its name anymore. Just bones of fences, a sagging barn, and a house that groaned in the night wind. Owen had buried his wife here 3 winters ago, and since then, the world had shrunk to cattle, dust, and silence. Neighbors stopped coming. Riders stopped greeting. Even the coyotes howled farther away, like they feared the loneliness that clung to him. He was riding north when he saw it, a shape in the heat shimmer. At first he thought it was a fallen calf. Then the shape moved. He slid from his saddle slowly, boots crunching on gravel as he approached. A girl lay in the sand. But she wasn't like any girl Owen had ever seen. She was enormous, taller than most men, even collapsed on her side. Her dark hair spilled across the dust like a broken banner. Her skin was streaked with dirt and blood. And her lips were cracked so badly they bled. Apache! Owen's hand hovered near his gun. The old fear rose in him, like a rattlesnake coiling in his gut. This land had known raids. Screams. Fire. Blood. Her eyes fluttered open. And she whispered a soundless word. Water. The wind howled between them, carrying the scent of dust and danger. Owen stared down at her, caught between survival and soul. Behind him, the desert went deadly still. He reached for his canteen, and heard hooves not far away. Owen turned sharply, scanning the ridgeline with narrowed eyes. The sound of hooves vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed by the desert wind. Maybe it was only a mirage. Maybe death had finally learned how to ride. Slowly, he knelt beside the girl. Her chest rose shallowly. Her skin burned with fever. His hands trembled as he lifted her head. The canteen felt heavier than a sack of gold. He tipped it gently, letting the smallest trickle touch her lips. Her fingers twitched, then grasped his wrist with terrifying strength. Her eyes snapped wide open. For one frozen heartbeat he thought she would kill him. But instead she drank. She drank like a dying river finding rain. Water spilled down her cheeks, streaking the dust into dark rivers. Her breathing deepened. Some shadow seemed to lift from her face. Only then did Owen realize how young she was, barely more than a child trapped inside the body of a legend. He carried her. It nearly broke him. He loaded her across his saddle and rode like hell itself chased him. Every sound made his muscles coil. Every dune hit a possible rifle barrel. Apaches did not leave their wounded behind. Not unless something terrible had happened. In the house, he laid her on his bed, the bed that hadn't known warmth since his wife died. He cleaned the blood from her scalp. The wound was bad but not fatal. A stone. A fall. Or worse, a fight. That night, the wind screamed through the broken shutters. Owen slept in a chair with a shotgun across his lap. At dawn, the bed was empty. Only wet footprints led toward the desert. But carved into the wooden floor were 3 strange marks, made with blood. And in the distance, dust rose from the horizon like an approaching storm. The dust cloud grew. At first, Owen thought it was a herd gone wild. But the sound wasn't hooves alone. It was rhythm. Heavy. Measured. Like war drums beating inside the earth. He climbed the small hill overlooking the ranch and froze. They were everywhere. Riders. Hundreds of them. Silent. Encircling. Apache warriors rode in a tightening ring around Dry Creek Ranch, their horses moving like shadows stitched from smoke. Rifles rested across their backs. Spears caught the sun, glinting like white lightning. Painted faces stared forward with quiet, controlled fury. Owen's heart pounded harder than any gunshot he'd ever heard. 300. Maybe more. He walked back to the house slowly and stood on the porch. He didn't grab his rifle. He didn't lock the door. He only rested one hand on the post and watched them close in. The wind carried their presence, the smell of leather, horse sweat, ash, and something older. Something that remembered blood. A warrior rode forward. His face was painted black and red. His posture was tall, calm, deadly. "Where is the girl?" the warrior asked. Owen swallowed hard. "She left." The warrior's eyes darkened. "You lie and you die slow." Another 100 horses stopped moving. The circle tightened. A storm of arrows rose from their backs, but none were drawn yet. The air was a rope pulled tight. And then from the far dunes, a familiar silhouette rose against the sun. The riders noticed it too. A figure walking alone toward the circle. Tall, steady, unarmed. The murmur that spread through the Apache warriors was not fear, it was shock. The girl had returned. Her hair was bound now. Her wounds were cleaned. Her eyes were clear. She walked like someone who had crossed the edge of death and come back carrying its shadow. She stepped into the circle between Owen and the war chief. The desert held its breath. She spoke rapidly in Apache. Her hands moved as she spoke, fast, urgent, alive. Faces changed. Eyes shifted. Muscles loosened. The chief studied Owen. "You gave her water?" he asked. Owen nodded. "And a bed." The chief dismounted his horse with slow, heavy movement. Every warrior became still. He walked to Owen, close enough for death to exist in a breath. Then he lowered his head. Not in submission, but in respect. Still, no one moved. There was no cheering, no relief, because just beyond the circle, new riders appeared on a distant ridge, white men. Watching, waiting, and they were not there by accident. Binoculars glinted in the distant sun. Owen didn't need them to know who those men were. The Blackjack Gang. Outlaws. Slavers. Thieves who wore smiles like knives and turned bones into money. If they were here, they hadn't come to watch peace form between old enemies. The Apache warriors noticed too. Hands tightened around rifles. Horses shifted nervously. The chief raised his hand. Silence fell. "They hunt," he said quietly. "And they hunt her." The girl stiffened. Now it made sense. She hadn't just collapsed. She had been running. The riders on the ridge started to move. Slow, confident, like wolves circling a wounded elk. Owen felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He reached behind the doorframe and pulled out his old rifle, wood worn smooth by time and loss. "This is my land," he said. The chief stepped beside him. "Then today, we defend it together." The wind picked up. Dust began to rise. 300 Apache warriors turned their horses toward the approaching threat. Across the plain, 5 outlaw silhouettes reached for their guns. The first gunshot cracked the sky. Owen pulled the trigger, and the desert erupted in fire. The desert exploded in sound. Gunfire cracked like thunder splitting bone. Dust leapt from the earth as lead tore through sand and stone. Owen's rifle bucked against his shoulder, the familiar recoil feeling like shaking hands with an old ghost. One of the blackjack riders tumbled from his horse, spinning into the dirt like a broken scarecrow. The Apache warriors moved like a storm given shape. Horses surged forward, hooves pounding like war drums. War cries filled the air, not wild, but controlled, ancient, and terrifyingly focused. Arrows flew in dark arcs, followed by clean, deliberate rifle shots. The Blackjack Gang wasn't prepared for this. They had expected fear. They found fury. A rider charged straight for Owen, face twisted in a grin that showed too many teeth. The outlaw fired first. The bullet cut through Owen's hat, tearing it away. Owen didn't hesitate. He fired once. The man collapsed mid-gallop. But something was wrong. The outlaws weren't fighting to win. They were buying time. Owen saw it just as a strange whistle sliced through the air. A signal. From behind the hill, more riders appeared. More than 5. Far more. A second wave. A trap inside a trap. The girl looked toward Owen, her eyes suddenly sharp with fear. She spoke one word. Run. But the chief was already raising his hand. Not to retreat. To charge. The earth trembled as 300 Apache warriors surged forward at once, racing toward a force that no one could yet fully see. And over the hill, something darker than men waited. The second wave crested the ridge. Not just outlaws, soldiers. Federal troops. Rifles gleaming in the sun. Coats trimmed in blue. Faces cold and trained for killing. A Gatling gun rolled behind them, its barrels catching the light like a metal serpent. This was no random raid. This was a coordinated extermination. The Apache chief's face hardened. They mean to erase us, he said. The girl stepped back, her large hands balling into fists. Her eyes locked on the machine gun like it was a living enemy. She had seen this before. Villages turned to ash. Children lost to gunfire. The government calling it peace. Owen's mind raced. His ranch sat right in the middle of 2 fires. No mercy from the outlaws. No mercy from the law. The first burst from the Gatling roared to life. Dirt leapt up in violent bursts. A warrior fell, his horse screaming as it crashed. Blood soaked into the thirsty ground. But then something changed. The Apache didn't scatter. They split. Like water flowing around stone. Half of them surged wide, vanishing behind rocks, cactus, and dunes. They were ghosts now, moving through their own land. The chief nodded slightly. A plan. But Owen saw something worse. A third movement. Behind his barn. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Someone was already on his land. He turned, rifle lifting, and came face to face with a man whose smile looked like a cut made permanent. The leader of the Blackjack gang. Sawyer Black. He dipped his hat. You got yourself into mighty dangerous company, rancher. And Sawyer's finger rested softly on his trigger. The air between them could have sparked a fire. Sawyer Black stood in the shade of the barn, long coat swaying gently in the warm wind. Scars stitched across his cheek like someone had tried, and failed, to erase him. His revolver sat low and loose in his hand, the grip of a man who'd killed without rushing. You picked the wrong day to grow a conscience, Sawyer said, eyes flicking toward the battlefield in the distance. One didn't blink. You picked the wrong ranch. Behind them, shots echoed. Screams cut through dust. Horses thundered like the sky itself was running. Sawyer stepped closer. That girl? Government's paying real fine for her. Alive or less so? Owen tightened his finger against the trigger. You don't touch her. Sawyer chuckled. Oh, I ain't here to touch her. I'm here to collect what kindness cost you. And he shot. The bullet grazed Owen's side. Fire exploded across his ribs. Owen staggered but stayed standing. Years of hauling fence posts, burying grief, and breaking wild horses hardened him more than Sawyer expected. They drew and fired at the same time. Wood splintered. Bullets screamed. Owen dove behind a post as Sawyer vanished behind the barn door. Dust drifted through sunlight. Silence swallowed the gunfire, thick, unnatural silence. Owen moved slowly around the barn. Sawyer was gone. But the back door of the house stood wide open. Owen's blood ran cold. Inside the house, footsteps creaked the floorboards. And a shadow passed across the wall. Someone else had entered the ranch house, and they weren't Apache. Owen moved through his home like he was walking through a memory that had turned hostile. Each floorboard groaned under his boots. Each shadow felt alive. A cupboard door stood open. A chair was overturned. Whoever had entered wasn't quiet. They were searching. He heard breathing. Not calm. Panicked. He rounded the corner. And found a boy. No more than 16. Dirt-streaked face. Wild eyes. Holding a pistol that shook in his hand. The boy fired. The bullet buried itself in the wall inches from Owen's head. The gun dropped from the boy's hand. He sank to his knees. I don't want to die, he whispered. Owen froze. This wasn't a killer. This was a pawn. Outside, the battle grew louder. Explosions. Horses screaming. The screaming of men who realize too late that war doesn't care who you are. The boy swallowed hard. They said she was a monster, he said. Said we'd be heroes. Owen thought of the girl, her cracked lips, her thirst, the way she'd walked back into a circle of death without flinching. She's more human than the men who sent you, Owen said. The floor vibrated. Something heavy moved outside. A new sound joined the battle. Chains. Metal turning. The Gatling gun was being repositioned. Closer. Much closer. The boy looked at Owen. They gonna burn this place. Owen realized the truth. They weren't surrounding the Apache. They were surrounding him. And the first cannon round whistled through the air. The explosion lifted the world apart. Owen's house shook as the shell slammed into the ground nearby, tearing a crater into the earth and sending a shockwave through the walls. The windows shattered outward. Dust and splinters filled the air. The boy screamed. Owen dragged him to the floor as another round hit closer. Outside, the battlefield had become chaos. Apache warriors surged through smoke. Outlaws fired wildly. Soldiers barked orders that no one could hear. The sun disappeared behind a wall of dust and fire. Then Owen saw her. The giant girl. She ran through the storm of bullets like she was made of stone and thunder. She reached a fallen Apache warrior, lifted him easily over her shoulder, and carried him to cover. A cannon round landed near her feet. She didn't stop. Something inside Owen broke open. This wasn't survival anymore. This was something bigger. He pulled the boy up by the collar. You want to live? Then follow me. They burst from the house. Straight into hell. A soldier aimed at Owen. The girl stepped in front of him. The bullet struck her shoulder. She staggered, but didn't fall. She turned toward the soldiers, eyes blazing not with rage, but with something far worse. Resolve. The Apache chief rode beside her, raising a rifle. All who stand here, he shouted, stand as one. Owen raised his rifle. The boy picked up a fallen weapon. 3 lives, once enemies, now aimed at the same threat. The battlefield went quiet for one impossible second. Then the soldiers charged. And the desert opened its jaws. The charge came like a living wave. Boots pounded. Hooves thundered. Rifles barked until the air became a wall of noise. The soldiers moved in tight lines, disciplined and merciless, their faces carved from the same cold stone as the Gatling gun behind them. Owen fired until his shoulder burned. The boy, his name was Eli, Owen learned through shouted chaos, fired beside him, hands no longer shaking. Fear had hardened into something sharper. The Apache warriors hit the soldiers from the flanks. They didn't shout. They didn't rage. They moved like the desert itself, silent, lethal, unstoppable. Arrows struck from nowhere. Rifles flashed from behind boulders and cactus. Men fell without ever seeing who killed them. The girl stood in the center of it all. Bullets tore the air around her, yet she moved without hesitation. She lifted fallen warriors, dragged wounded to safety. At one point, she wrenched a rifle from a fallen soldier and fired it with terrifying accuracy. Blood soaked into the earth, and the earth, ancient and patient, drank it. Then a new sound cut through the chaos. A war horn. Apache. The chief turned his horse sharply. His eyes locked on the far ridge. Reinforcements. But not for them. From the west, more blue coats appeared, dozens of them. This was never a battle. It was a purge. Owen felt the truth like a knife in his chest. They weren't meant to survive this. And behind the new soldiers, a familiar white horse stepped forward. The rider atop the white horse looked like death dressed as a gentleman. Colonel Harlan Graves. His hat was clean. His coat unwrinkled. His boots untouched by the blood in the sand. He rode through battlefield chaos as if walking through a ballroom. Graves studied the scene through a spyglass. Efficient, he murmured. Orders were given with lazy hand gestures. A line of soldiers shifted their Gatling gun toward the Apache. Another set aimed directly at Owen's house. Graves had not come for control. He had come for silence. The girl saw him. Something passed over her face. Fear, recognition, memory. She whispered one word, barely audible. Butcher. She moved toward him. The chief caught her arm. No. But she pulled free. For the first time, the giant girl ran not to save, but to confront. Graves lowered his spyglass and smiled. So the mountain walks. He raised a hand. The Gatling gun turned. Its barrels began to spin. Owen realized what was coming. He shouted her name, but no one knew it. No one had ever asked. The first burst ripped through the ground at her feet. The second tore through the air around her. She kept moving. The third burst struck her in the leg. She fell to one knee. And the spinning barrels of the gun began to glow. And Graves calmly gave the order to fire until nothing moved. The world narrowed to fire and sound. Owen ran. Bullets tore the air past him, biting into the dirt like angry insects. He didn't think. Didn't breathe. He only moved. The girl lay in the open sand, her massive frame exposed to the rising fury of the Gatling gun. The Apache chief raised his rifle. If she dies, he said to no one, the sky will fall. Owen reached her as another burst swept inches above her body. He grabbed her shoulder. She grabbed his wrist. Her eyes found his. And for the first time, she spoke in English. My name is Naya. The world seemed to pause. Naya. A name that belonged to wind and stone and old mountains. Owen dragged her behind the broken remains of a wagon. Bullets ripped through the wood, shredding it like paper. She tried to stand. She couldn't. Her leg was torn open, blood flowing freely. Eli reached them, pressed his shaking hands to the wound. I can stop it, he whispered. Owen realized, too late, that Eli knew more about pain than he ever should. On the ridge, Graves watched through his glass. He saw her alive. And his smile faded. That complicates things, he said. He made a small gesture with his hand. A signal. From somewhere unseen, thunder answered. And the ground began to tremble like something huge was waking beneath it. The earth split open with sound. From behind the western dunes, something massive rolled into view. Steel. Spiked wheels. A plated body like a giant metal coffin. The soldiers called it the Iron Serpent, a mobile cannon platform built to end rebellions before they started. Its long barrel turned slowly, like a blind god searching for a target. The Apache warriors froze. They had faced rifles. They had faced fire. They had never faced this. Graves raised his hand again. The cannon fired. The world detonated. A cluster of warriors vanished in a cloud of red mist and flying sand. Horses screamed. A wave of heat rolled over the battlefield. Owen covered Naya's body with his own as debris rained from the sky. Eli stared in horror. This ain't war, he whispered. This is slaughter. The chief rode into view, his horse rearing as fire danced across the horizon. He raised both arms. A signal of retreat. Or so it seemed. But the Apache didn't run. They disappeared. Into dunes. Into crevices. Into shadows. The desert swallowed them. Graves frowned. He didn't like losing sight of prey. The Iron Serpent turned again. This time, its barrel pointed toward Owen's ranch house. Toward the last standing symbol of kindness on this broken land. End it, Graves said softly. The cannon began to glow. And Owen realized he could not save both the house and the girl. Owen felt time slow. To one side, the house that held his memories. His wife's ghost. His last thread to peaceful life. To the other, bleeding. Alive. The cannon roared. The ranch house vanished in flame and splintered wood. The old world ended in a single breath. Owen didn't look back. He lifted Naya in his arms. Heavy. Not because of her size, but because of what she represented. Eli ran beside him as they disappeared behind a wall of smoke. The Apache chief appeared like a ghost from the dust, reaching out to guide them toward hidden rock formations. The desert hides its own, the chief said. If we are worthy. Behind them, the Iron Serpent rolled forward, crushing dead wood and burning hopes. Graves watched calmly. She runs, and yet she lives, he murmured. Good. He turned his horse back toward the horizon. Now the hunt becomes art. The smoke thickened. The sky darkened. The desert seemed to close its jaws. Owen held Naya's hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Her fingers tightened around his. And far away, a howl rose into the air. Not from a man. Not from a beast. From something older. Something angry. And somewhere beneath the desert, an ancient secret began to stir. The desert opened like a wound. Where flat, empty land once stretched, the earth suddenly dropped away into a jagged canyon carved by forgotten storms. The Apache chief led them down a narrow, winding path hidden between towering stone walls that rose like the ribs of some ancient beast. The air cooled. The wind softened. The sound of war faded. Owen carried Naya through it all, his arms shaking not from weakness, but from fear of what would happen if he stopped. Her breathing was shallow. Her blood stained his sleeves dark and warm, but her hands still clung to his, and that small truth kept him moving forward. Eli followed close behind. I didn't know places like this existed, the boy whispered. They exist because they are needed, the chief replied. At the canyon floor, the Apache people emerged from shadows like spirits. Women, children, elders, all hidden away in a stone-carved refuge untouched by the world's cruelty. They laid Naya on woven blankets. Her tribe gathered around her. A healer pressed herbs to her wound. The chief turned to Owen. You crossed into the heart of those we once feared, he said. Few do that and live. Owen's answer was only a hoarse whisper. She gave me a reason. High above, on the canyon rim, dust rose once more. The hunt hadn't ended. The iron serpent rolled ever closer, and Colonel Graves had finally found their trail. Naya drifted in darkness. Dreams of fire, of cold chains, of strange white rooms and men who called her specimen and asset. She saw herself as a child, towering over other children. Worshipped. Taken. Then she heard Owen's voice. It pulled her back. Her eyes opened slowly. The cave ceiling was low and warm-colored from torchlight. The smell of desert herbs filled her lungs. Her tribe's faces surrounded her, and Owen sat beside her. You stayed, she whispered. He nodded. I'm not much good at leaving. Her fingers searched for his. Found them. Outside the canyon, Apache scouts moved along the ridges like ghosts. They saw the dust trail, the metal gleam, the slow, patient crawl of destruction. The iron serpent. Graves rode calmly behind it, his white horse moving as if it felt no fear. The canyon, he said aloud. Perfect. In the shadows below, the chief listened to the reports. They bring thunder, one scout said. They always do, the chief replied. He turned to Owen. You must leave, he said. This is our storm. Owen stood. No. Silence fell over the cave. I gave her water, Owen said. Not because she was Apache, but because she was dying. He raised his rifle slightly. I'll finish that kindness. The ground trembled faintly under their feet. The canyon began to feel very small. And the first artillery shell screamed through the canyon air. The blast lit the canyon like the birth of a star. Fire rolled through the narrow stone halls, bouncing from wall to wall in thunderous echoes. Sand rained from above. Rock dust filled every breath. The Apache people moved fast. Not in fear. In practice. Children were pulled into deeper tunnels. Elders guided through hidden doorways. Warriors vanished into cracks in the walls that didn't seem wide enough to hold a man. This canyon was not a shelter. It was a fortress. Owen helped carry Naya deeper into the stone belly of the earth. I can walk, she insisted. He ignored her. Outside, soldiers tried to descend the canyon walls. Grappling hooks flew. Ropes tightened. Boots scraped. Apache arrows cut ropes silently. Men fell. No screams. Just sudden emptiness where life had been. Graves watched from above. Persistent people, he said calmly. He raised his hand. The iron serpent rolled closer to the edge. Its barrel angled downward. The canyon trembled in anticipation. Inside, the chief gathered his warriors. This is where we make them believe in ghosts, he said. The warriors vanished into narrow side passages. Naya pushed herself upright despite the pain. I won't hide, she said. Owen met her eyes. Then don't. She took his rifle. Her hands were steady. From the canyon walls, rifles began to emerge from stone as if the rock itself had grown teeth. The first volley echoed like thunder born underground. And Colonel Graves realized he had driven straight into a living grave. Gunfire roared inside the canyon. Smoke twisted like serpents. The Apache attack didn't come as a wave, it came as whispers. Shots from nowhere. Stealthy movements. Fear growing with every unanswered echo. Soldiers fired wildly. They hit shadows. Ropes snapped. Men slipped. Above it all, the Iron Serpent fired again, but now blindly. Graves frowned for the first time. He felt it. He had lost control of the battlefield. A sudden crack split the air. His white horse reared up. The animal collapsed. Graves didn't fall. He stepped free calmly, boots touching the ground as if he had always intended to walk. An Apache warrior stood across from him on a narrow ledge. A rifle in hand. A steady breath. Graves tipped his head. "You almost surprised me," he said. The warrior fired. The bullet grazed Graves' shoulder. Blood stained his perfect coat. For the first time, he looked human. Below, Owen and Naya moved through the rock tunnels together, side by side. Not hiding. Hunting. They reached a narrow opening leading to the outer canyon. And they saw something chilling. The Iron Serpent was turning. Not toward them. Toward the Apache civilians' tunnel. Toward the heart of the canyon. Naya's voice dropped to a whisper. "They found us." And the Iron Serpent began powering up for a point-blank blast. Time bent. Owen ran. Naya ran beside him despite the injury, her steps heavy but unstoppable. Eli followed close behind, clutching a rifle too big for his shoulders but not too big for his heart. Inside the darkest chamber of the canyon, Apache families huddled in silence. They felt the vibration before they heard it. The Iron Serpent's barrel glowed faintly outside the tunnel's fragile stone wall. The chief joined Owen, his eyes fierce. "This wall," he said, pressing his palm to the rock, "is old. Older than guns. Older than hatred." He looked at Naya. "Strike where the earth is weakest." She understood. She slammed the base of her staff, carved from ancient oak, into a fracture line in the stone. The canyon answered. Stone cracked. Not collapsing, but shifting. The ground behind the Iron Serpent lurched. The earth caved inward. The massive machine tilted. Soldiers shouted. Graves watched in disbelief as the desert itself betrayed him. The Iron Serpent slid. Slow. Helpless. Then vanished into a newly formed chasm without a single explosion. Only silence. Dust rolled in heavy waves. The canyon breathed. Graves stood alone on the ridge. Gunfire stopped. Wind replaced war. His lips thinned. "This," he said quietly, "is not over." He turned and walked into the smoke. Above the canyon, storm clouds began to gather where no storm had been forecast. And the sky itself seemed to prepare for judgment. The canyon went silent. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that pressed against the ears, thick and heavy, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. The giant's mouth opened. Light poured from the cracks between its stone plates, glowing molten gold and sickly amber, like fire trapped inside living rock. The ground trembled, not from movement, but from weight, the sheer pressure of something ancient drawing breath after centuries of silence. Then it spoke. Not in words. In sound. A low, grinding thunder that rolled through the canyon like distant avalanches. The sound vibrated through Owen's bones, through Naya's blood, through the rifles clutched in the hands of terrified men. Horses reared in panic, their screams cutting through the air as ropes snapped and hooves crushed dust into choking clouds. Owen dropped to one knee, his hands braced against the dirt. It felt like standing before a god that had never learned mercy. Naya, however, stayed standing. Her fingers remained pressed firmly against the giant's chest, her eyes squeezed shut, black hair whipping violently in the rising wind. Her lips moved, whispering words older than the Iron Serpent, older than rifles, older than Graves and his hunger for power. She was answering it. The Apache warriors stared at her in awe and terror, understanding that this was no longer a standoff between men. This was a conversation between blood and stone. Behind them, on the ridge, Commander Graves raised his hand. "Artillery units," he barked through clenched teeth. "Aim for the creature's head. I want it shattered." His officers hesitated. "Sir, if we fire, the canyon walls could collapse. Then we'll bury the girl with it," Graves snapped. "Fire!" Metal groaned. The iron serpent's cannon rotated, gears screeching. Owen's heart stopped. He tried to run toward Naya, but the ground split open in front of him, a jagged crack tearing through the dirt as the giant shifted its stance. The earth itself was waking up. Naya opened her eyes. They were glowing faintly gold. And then the giant lifted its head toward the soldiers, and its voice, this time clearer, angrier, rose like a storm breaking from stone. The iron serpent's cannon locked into position and began to glow. The ground trembled like a living drum as the giant's roar cascaded through the canyon. Dust swirled violently, creating blinding walls that separated man from beast. The Apache warriors scattered into defensive positions, arrows ready, rifles trembling in their hands. Horses screamed and bolted, hooves pounding like thunder on the cracked earth. Owen clutched Naya's arm, holding her steady. She had one hand pressed against the giant's chest, whispering ancient words that seemed to bend the air itself. The glow in her eyes reflected in the molten fissures along the giant's shoulders. Each word she spoke caused the creature to shift slightly, as if it were listening, understanding, judging. Graves, atop the ridge, slammed his fist against the iron serpent's controls. "Now," he shouted, "fire everything. Don't let it live." The cannon's barrels spun faster, red-hot metal glowing with deadly anticipation. The first round erupted from the serpent, a column of fire and molten lead tearing through the canyon air. But before it could strike the giant, the ground beneath the serpent cracked violently. Rocks heaved upward, and the canyon itself seemed to lift, swallowing the massive weapon halfway into the earth. Sparks and metal fragments flew as the iron serpent toppled to the side, buried in a cloud of dust. The soldiers froze, staring at the impossible. The giant's roar came again, low and rumbling, shaking loose sand and shaking the bones of men foolish enough to stand still. Naya stepped forward, unafraid, and her voice rose in rhythm with the stone behemoth, commanding and steady. Owen felt the desert pulse beneath him as if the earth had grown alive, fighting alongside them. Rocks rose like jagged teeth from the canyon floor, forming a barricade against advancing soldiers. Bullets struck stone and bounced harmlessly away, sparks flying. The Apache chief rode beside Owen, his voice steady over the roar. "The desert remembers. Respect it or it devours." A soldier tried to climb toward Naya's position, rifle raised, but a pillar of rock surged upward from the earth beneath his feet, pinning him as the giant's amber eyes glowed brighter. His scream was cut short by the deafening roar of the desert's fury. And as the soldiers fell into chaos, Graves realized, too late, that the giant's wrath would not stop until every threat was crushed or obeyed.